Cloud. Okay. So I'd like to welcome everyone to today's webinar. I'm happy that we were able to do this. I'm Lori Greiner, and I'm the chair of the Instructional Design and IT Learning Community. And I'd like to welcome you all. And I'm pleased that we have Victor with us today to talk about translation and captioning on Zoom and other technologies. But before we get started, I'd like to put a plug in for the instructional design and IT learning community. I volunteered to serve as the chair this year. The learning community hasn't been real active the last couple of years, and considering the situation we are in with COVID and all the things that are happening with the pandemic, I thought that we certainly, this particular learning community would be of value to hopefully to many people. So if you're interested in maybe volunteering to help me out, provide additional leadership for the learning community, I'd appreciate it. I will put my email and my phone number in the chat box. So if you're interested, you can contact me. Also, at the end of this webinar, we will distribute a survey where you can provide additional feedback about the webinar, and if you have any ideas and suggestions for future sessions, that would be great. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Victor. If you're not familiar with Victor Villegas, did I say that right?
Villegas.
Villegas. I'm terrible at my Spanish. He's the Technology and Media Support Coordinator for Oregon State University Extension, and he's going to talk to us today about tools and technologies that can be used to provide information in different languages online, including real-time interpreting in Zoom. And he'll also cover some best practices. So I'll turn it over to you, Victor.
Thank you, Lori. So let me start sharing my screen here. Start the presentation. Feel free to put any questions in the chat box anytime. Lori will be moderating that, and she can let me know when there's a question for me. Welcome to this webinar. This is language translation and online interpreting. And again, my name is Victor Villegas. Soy coordinador de soportes de tecnología en medios. And if that sounds kind of strange to you, that's because that's in Spanish. So here's my English translation for that. Technology and Media Support Coordinator for Oregon State University Extension Service. And as I get started on here, I want to kind of go into the why this is important. Not just to you all, but specifically my why for doing these types of presentations and for doing diversity, equity, and inclusion work. And for that, I kind of have to go into a little bit of my back history, right? So both my parents are originally from Mexico. They immigrated to the United States. I grew up learning English and Spanish, so I'm bilingual, bicultural. And there was a time actually that we went back to Mexico. I was born here in the United States, but they went back, and I lived and studied in Mexico for 3 years. So very familiar with living on both sides of the fence on both countries. And my grandparents also immigrated to the United States. My grandparents on my mother's side did not speak any English until they died. They lived here in the United States for many, many years, but didn't really speak English. So they had to have their children interpret for them and translate. And that was kind of rough. On my dad's side, my grandfather did not know English. My grandmother did, but my grandfather didn't even know how to read. So even if he did know English, he wouldn't have been able to read it. So that's one of the reasons that I kind of have a passion for this type of work. So that's my personal why. And we need to talk a little bit about equality versus equity here, right? So I'm sure you've seen variations of this graphic in the past. Equity is when every student has what they need to succeed. And, you know, sometimes we say, well, we all have equal access, right? Well, that's not equitable. Equity is actually having things in the way people need it, not necessarily that everybody has the equal access. That's not necessarily equitable. And this graphic kind of shows you that. In the first picture there, we have everyone is at the same level, but they still can't reach the board equally, right? Supposedly it's equal, but it's not. And then equitable is like, okay, everybody has the access that they need in the way they need it specifically, right, in their circumstance. So we're talking about language access here. And when we talk about language access, we actually have to talk about accessibility also. So this is more than just, you know, translating. When we're talking about translating and interpreting, we have to also considering technology access, right? So we can have websites, we can have webinars, but if the audience that we're trying to reach that speaks a different language does not have access to technology, then it's kind of like all for naught, right? So you really have to know your audience. We also have to take into account skill level and training. People of different backgrounds that are not native English speakers sometimes do not have the education or the training in order to even access. Let's say they do have the technology. I mean, they get onto a webinar trying to get onto a Zoom call. Do they even know how to use it? You know, so I've gone as far as actually providing training at the beginning of a webinar or a training session for non-English speakers and train them on how to use Zoom, right? Either from a mobile device, which many people have instead of computers. And it's really important to take that into consideration. We're not just doing the translating and the interpreting service. Sometimes we're having to do take the extra step and actually do the training of how to use these services. Affordability is another thing. Sometimes we have webinars that, you know, cost money. Do people have the funds available? So we'd like to provide a lot of stuff for free. And then there's a time availability. If you're having a webinar put out there, is it at the appropriate time? You know, if you usually have something between 8 a.m., 5 p.m., you know, that works for the regular person, but someone that maybe works out in the field all the time might not be able to get home until after 6 or 7, or maybe weekends are better, or they have to, you know, work with the kids or something. So you have to maybe change your time as to when you're presenting these webinars and trainings online, and make it available asynchronously, right? So maybe they can see it in a video versus a real-time presentation. And then finally, is it culturally appropriate and safe? We can do a lot of translations that, you know, hey, we just translated into, you know, English to Spanish or English into Vietnamese, but are the messages culturally appropriate, right? And is your webinar a safe space for folks? One just really quick example is like, do you record your meetings when you're having these presentations with, let's say, folks that have limited English speaking and they're Spanish speakers? Some of those people might not want to be recorded, right? And so you have to provide a safe space for them. Just one of the things to take into consideration. So cultural relevance. Your organization is culturally relevant if what you do and how you do it is relevant to multicultural audiences, okay? It's not just straight translation and interpreting, but it's doing it in a culturally relevant way. And we're doing it with sensitivity and empathy and compassion. Basically treating people as human beings. So some best practices. The first one sounds like an oxymoron. It says avoid translation and interpreting, right? And it's like, what do you mean by that? Well, if there's possibility of avoiding translation interpreting and just going directly into that language and not going from English to Spanish, but going to what I like to call native language first, it's always the best, right? So anytime you're translating and interpreting, even with the best interpreters and translators, there's possibilities of having something lost in the translation, right? And it's going to take extra time and whatnot. So let's say you're doing a webinar. Do you want to interpret that webinar real time? Do you want to have some captioning afterwards? Or do you just want to do that webinar in that language to begin with, right? So if we're going to have an audience that's mainly Spanish speaking, why don't we just do the webinar fully in Spanish and forget about the English, right? Obviously, you have to have trained agents and communicators that speak that language and are able to give the information that you want to give out. And that's why I think representation is very important. So think about if you're able to do that, it's actually the best way, right? You're giving it to the people in the way that they want it, in the way that they're used to. And remember, it's not about us, it's about them. So yeah, I like to use that native language first, or in my case, Spanish language first, because that's what I specialize in. And we sometimes have information in English, and then Spanish is kind of like an afterthought, right? And we translate that. But what if you started with a language first philosophy where you started with your original publication in Spanish, and then maybe did it in English afterwards, or not even do an English version? Is it really needed, right? If possible, have capable native speakers interpret and translate. And this is a tough one, because if you don't know a certain language, how do you know that those people are capable? And so you have to kind of vet your translation and interpreting services and contractors, especially for Spanish. And the reason being, because different to other languages, such as, Japanese or Korean, Vietnamese, Creole or whatnot, Spanish is very, very diverse. So Spanish from Spain versus Spanish from Cuba, Spanish from Argentina, Spanish from Mexico. Yeah, we can all understand each other for the most part, but there's different words and phrases that don't translate well, even amongst Spanish speakers and Latinos, because we're so different. Our countries and language, our dialects can be fairly different. It's one example. So how do you translate cake into Spanish? Well, it depends which country you're from, because for some it's torta, for some is pastel, for some think it's bizcocho. It's just like, it's all over the place, right? And then one country's name for something could mean something else for another country, and it's all Spanish, So definitely vet your translation. Unfortunately, a lot of that translation and professional translation and interpreting services are folks who, are like from Spain or Argentina, and it's not the same as your typical house translation in Mexico, right, or Cuban. So try to look for services in your area, if you're using third parties, that specialize in the type of language that the clients that you're trying to reach. So in my case, I used to do medical interpreting and translation, and I still do some side translation on occasion. And my specialty is Mexican Spanish, right? Because that's where my parents from. I've lived there. I know that specific version of Spanish. And so that's my specialty. I sure would not want to translate for Cuban and Puerto Rican. I could do it, but I would not feel as capable or as proficient. There's also different cadences, right? And a different accent. So keep that in mind.
Hey, Victor.
Yes.
One of the things that I have found, because we've gotten more and more requests for translation for some of our publications, is that, and I'm never sure, like I work with somebody now that has a degree in Spanish,
Mhm.
So I kind of use her to kind of read over things after they've been translated. But then I always try to also try to find a client or somebody that we work with to kind of read over to make sure it
Yes.
all makes sense.
Right.
Because I'm afraid of offending somebody here, coming
No,
off
I totally.
as being what are they talking about, you know? So I try to do that when I can. I'll send it to an agent and I'll say, can you have a couple of your clients read this over to make sure
Yes.
it makes sense? And that usually works out really well.
That is perfect. I mean, when I used to do my business doing translation and interpreting, one of my selling points is that my translations are guaranteed to be um, understood by native, and they were, how do you say, reviewed by at least two native speakers, right? Of Mexican Spanish speakers, which nobody else provided that, right? And so it was kind of my selling point that I could do that. And the reason being is that here's a funny anecdote. I used to work at a print shop, and they were doing some printing of some Spanish materials, and the guys at the press were like laughing at what they were printing. I was like, "What's going on? What's going on?" It's like, read what says on there, and it said, well, let's see, the English version would have been um, this grass. It was like grass seed or something like that. So it's like this grass seed will be will give you luxurious grass, right? That was the intention, but somehow it got translated into Spanish as to lujuria, which is, instead of lujoso, it was lujuria, which means lascivious. So it's like, wow, that's okay. So that's some pretty sexy grass there. So uh, and it was funny because the salesman that did the print job, he'd taken it to an official translation, right? And he had the workers read it, and they said, that's not right. That's correct. That's not correct. You shouldn't do that. You don't put that on there. And he believed the professionals, right, versus just the end workers. And then when I read it, I was like, you know what? Bring all the translations through me, because that's just yeah, I mean, that's being lazy. And I know you think that the educated people and the professionals are better than the end users, but you know, one of the problems that I did understand from that salesperson is that, yeah, you could take it to a bunch of end users and each one's going to give you something a little bit different, which I understand, you know. And so, but still, I ended up doing kind of the in between and checking those things. One time they brought me one translation and I said, oh, yeah, here's some changes that I recommend. And the salesperson was a little bit nervous, and he goes, oh, I got that from the university professor that does Spanish. You know, they got a PhD in Spanish. And I go show it to them, show them my edits. And that person said, you know what? Those changes are better. It's like, see, I told you what I was talking about, because I know what. So yeah, vet your translation people if at all possible. So going on, don't rely on machine translations. There's a lot of supposed professionals that they just run it through software and, you know, don't really take much look at it and just give it to you and say, hey, we did the translation. It's like, wow, wait a minute, you know, machine language translation is getting better. It works pretty good. And I'll actually show you Google Translate. It's in the last couple of years, it's probably getting to about 90, 95+% of accuracy. A few years back, it was really bad, really, really bad. And I've done some translations now through software that's like 100%, you know, accuracy. But I always read it, no matter what. I don't trust it 100%. And it's getting better, but it's not quite there anymore. So don't rely completely on machine translations. Another best practice that I see a lot of folks make a mistake, even the professionals, is don't translate official names. So in the case of Oregon State University, we don't call it in Spanish, La Universidad del Estado de Oregon, right? Because that's not our official name. The official name is in English. That is a copyright thing. It's Oregon State University. Everybody knows Oregon State University is. La Universidad del Estado de Oregon is not commonly known. That's not what you hear in the commercials or the printed materials or the logo, right? There is no logo that has that Spanish version in it. So we always use the official names, right? We have fudged a little bit on the extension service and say Servicio de Extensión, because that's not an official name, but I still prefer to have even that in English also, right? Just to keep it consistent. And this has to do with like business names, government entities, like the USDA. Yes, I would keep all of that stuff in English, those official names. It creates better consistency when people go looking, because they're not, if they go Google stuff in that Spanish version or any other language, they're not going to find it, right? It only exists in the official English version. So here's another tricky thing. So anticipate Spanish being longer in text and speaking time than equivalent English. So if you take 500 words of English and you translate it into Spanish, I don't know how this is for other language, but again, my specialty is Spanish, you're going to end up with more text, more than 500 words. It's just, the Spanish is much more, how would I say it, flowery, extra words to describe kind of the same things. English can be very succinct and short, but Spanish is much more descriptive. And so you actually have to allow for extra space. So if you think you're doing a one-pager, you might end up with 1.5, and you'll have to edit if you want to keep it down under, the same amount of text, but you're going to be leaving some things out. So same thing goes with speaking time. So if you're doing voiceover work, you have a video and you want to translate an English video into a Spanish video, that voiceover is going to be longer and you might have to re-edit the video. I mean, it's possible if you're speaking slow enough in English that you can fit the Spanish in there. But as another example, I did a voiceover, Spanish voiceover for a commercial one time, and they gave me the script in English and I had to translate it into Spanish and then do the voiceover for the commercial. And it was a 30-second commercial. They couldn't make it any longer, right? The video itself. And so I had to speak very fast in Spanish in order to get all the information that they wanted to. So it sounded a lot faster than the English version, but I just had to speak faster in order to fit it in the amount of time. Sometimes that's maybe why you hear Spanish commercials sound like they're just just rattling off words, because we have to fit a lot of words into a little bit of space. I'm seeing the number there. Is there any questions coming up, Lori? Or?
There's one from, is it Nadine? Is there a template we could use that will automatically translate? I'm not sure what
template. I'll show you some tools. Yeah.
Okay.
And,
like sometimes you can change a language on the actual,
yes,
page.
Right.
That's
yeah. I'll show you how to do that.
Okay. So
interpreting best practices. There's two commonly used types of interpretation that we deal with. The first one is simultaneous interpretation. That basically means someone is interpreting in real time at the same time that an English speaker is speaking. It is not like the consecutive one is basically an English speaker speaks a few sentences, then it gets translated into Spanish, right? And then then the English speaker speaks, and then the other language person speaks. And so the consecutive, it's like one after another after another. Simultaneous, it's happening at the same time. So that's kind of like what they do at the UN, where they're wearing the headphones and they're listening to their interpreter interpret at the same time that the person is speaking in English or another language, right? So the types of simultaneous interpretation we have available is either visual, which is captioning, it's text, or it's audio, which someone, speaking in a earpiece, or a radio, a channel that's different than the English one. There's different ways to do audio, and I'll show you how to do that in Zoom. And then the consecutive interpretation, best practice is having dedicated interpreters for each language. So what does that mean?
Mom, you know the
Yes.
song here, My Mother's Savage Daughters?
I think someone has their mic on. Okay, thank you. So, for example, yes, you could have one person be the English and Spanish translator at the same time. It's a lot of work. It's tough, even under the best of conditions. And so my recommendations, if you're able to afford it, or if you have some volunteers, is to have a dedicated interpreter for each language. So let's say you're doing consecutive, you have going from English to Spanish. So you have the interpreter interpreting English, and he's now speaking in Spanish. Sometimes there's questions from the audience that goes the other way, right? So they're going from Spanish to English. In an online situation, I recommend having another interpreter that then interprets from Spanish to English for the English folks, right? That makes sense? It's kind of a two-way thing. That way you know exactly that this one interpreter is always interpreting in the Spanish, and then this other interpreter is always interpreting in the English, and people do not get confused. If you have the same person, it's quite a challenge. Not always possible, but that would be the recommendation if you can. And then train and prep your presenters on how to work with interpreters. I mean, there's some presenters that just, they think you're doing a simultaneous interpretation, and they'll just go on and do paragraphs after paragraphs, a bunch of, if you're speaking for like 5-10 minutes straight, there's no way you're going to be able to interpret all of that and remember everything that person said. So you want people to kind of speak in chunks. So, a couple sentences at a time, pause, speak slowly. Yes, it's going to take you longer than your regular presentation, but it's important for your non-English speakers to understand. So, take your time. It takes practice sometimes too, so not everybody can do it. So some examples. Here's an example that we have from our outdoor school program of multiple languages, which is great. So these are the ones that we provide. These are the main languages in Oregon that are, I want to say popular, but I mean, this is the ones that are most used, with Spanish probably being the biggest one, followed by possibly Russian and Vietnamese. Although, as you can see, there's definitely other languages there that are commonly used in Oregon. So there's an example right here of something the outdoor school put out. This got translated into Spanish. And we had to contend with the extra, you see, there's not a lot of space here. There's a lot of English here, right? And it's like, if you translate this into Spanish, you're going to run out of room if you're going to do kind of like word by word or sentence by sentence. So you would have to edit in order to make things fit. The other thing, and this is going back to the cultural relevancy, when they had this translated, and they kept a picture of the white boy there, which is not culturally relevant, right? And it just seems like a minor thing, but to me, it's like, what kind of message are you giving out there? It's a subliminal, maybe. It's like, well, couldn't we find a picture of a Latino kid if we're actually kind of promoting this to Latino Hispanics? And they had a hard time because we didn't have a lot of photographs of Latinx youth. So keep that in mind when you're doing translations. You might have to have visuals that go with it that are culturally appropriate. because it just puts people off, right? If you're providing this, it's like, oh, well, this was an afterthought. It was just, let's just translate this into English, but it's not really meant for us, right? I mean, that's kind of the feeling you get if you're the end user that is not a native English speaker. So fortunately, they were able to find something to put on there. And I said, okay, that's a little bit better. Another thing about this, if you were to actually read the text, it's a lot of legal mumble jumble, which they had to do. But in reality, I said, who's this meant for? Is this meant for like parents of these children? Because this information is like way over their heads and it's not anything that they're interested. They just want to know, okay, outdoor school, what is it? How can my kid participate? And is it safe, right? And all this legal stuff means nothing to them. So again, going back to this culturally appropriate, what is your end goal? What are you trying to communicate? It's not just about translating things from English to Spanish or any other language. It's actually keeping your audience in mind and giving them what they want in the way that they expect it and what they need, right? So always audience first. Here's some examples of some materials that we have in Spanish, and this is kind of cool. Let me see if I can get out here. Yeah, great, you're still seeing this. So let's go to our website. And this is a great picture. This is actually our home page here at OSU Extension. Great photo. It's all in English, but we are, trying to have diversity, equity, and inclusion as part of our communications there, so that we're out there. We're making sure that we're highlighting other diverse populations, even on our English materials, right? Because all kinds of people see these things. So if we go into our search and you put Español, we have tagged our information that's in Spanish. And so it's very easy. You can filter by language, and there's 34 items in Spanish that are tagged with Español. I haven't checked if we have them tagged in Spanish. See what that brings up. This will be interesting. And there's 102 in Spanish. Russian is 2 and 1 is Japanese. So this is interesting. When I search for the keyword Spanish, we have 102, but if I go Español, which is what a Spanish speaker is going to look for, they're not typing Spanish. Well, I mean, I suppose they could, but it would be more appropriate for them to type the word in their native language, right? There's only 34. So we're missing out on all those other materials because we haven't tagged it correctly. So that's something I'm going to have to get back to the communications group about that. Here's a poster. And this one it's all in Spanish. It's even kind of culturally appropriate. I mean, it's not your little white girl as the main character in here, right? And we have people from diverse ethnicities on there, which is awesome. It just makes people feel better. It's like, wow, they actually thought about this, right? We're not just a second thought when doing translations. Here's another that's culturally appropriate for workers. This was a speed hand washing for folks that are working out in the field or fabrics. And this was our target audience. So it's not just about the words, it's about the look and feel about it. Again, being culturally relevant. Let's go back to my presentation. And videos. Okay, so this will show you a little bit. We have closed captioning here, and let me actually play the video. Are you getting audio there? I don't think I selected audio. Let me go back and make sure.
No, we couldn't hear anything, Victor.
Yeah. Got it. Okay, wrong screen. There it is. I think. Too many windows open. Yeah, we got it. All right, so you're here, you're seeing the title here. This is in Spanish. And there is a little CC button way down here. That's closed captioning. This is an interesting one because this is actually Spanish first. It was produced in Spanish for Spanish speakers. It was not created in English and then
La
translated.
agricultura es un sector muy importante de la economía de
And
Oregon.
if I click on the
Como
closed
trabajador
caption,
en la agricultura, lo que
closed
haces
caption
puede
is
tener
actually
efectos
English.
en todas las personas que consumen las frutas o vegetales que cosechas. Cada uno de ustedes tiene mucha responsabilidad para
Now you're going to think, well, why do we have English captions on a Spanish video, right? I mean, don't we have an English video? It's like, well, no, our main audience was the farm workers. And so Spanish was the thing that we started off with. And then it's like, well, why do you need the English text if they're listening to it in Spanish? Well, there are people that are bilingual. And just because they're farm workers doesn't mean that they're native Spanish speakers. They could have been born here in the United States, they're farm workers, and they grew up bilingual, and they actually prefer English or a combination, you know, and giving them that option is a good thing. So this could also be read by, you know, employers, and so they understand what the video is saying. Yes, Lori.
So Victor, I have a question about that because we have a faculty member here that does some videos. He had a grant and he created some videos, and some of them, and he's from Argentina, so he's able to do his own translation and everything. So he sometimes he creates the video and speaks in Spanish and then does the English captions, and then sometimes he does it vice versa. My challenge is, though, for accessibility reasons, you have to have, so you just provide transcripts of both languages. That way you've got it covered. If somebody,
yes,
you know, can't hear or see, they would still be able to maybe have the translations or the transcript.
That is correct. Yes. So if you can put those transcripts into the text and in the description of the video, it's ideal. You can also have multiple closed captioning in different languages. So you can actually choose. This one just happens to have just the English one, but if you had different languages, you could choose which language you wanted to show up. But it is a manual thing, so the end user has to actually select that, unfortunately.
Now, I'm sure you're going to talk about that, but are those captions ones that you manually put in, or were they auto-generated?
They were probably auto-generated originally, and then you have to go back in there and edit them because, again, the machine translation is decent and it's getting better, but it's not 100%. So you want to make sure you get the right words. It helps when you have a native speaker speaking it because they're more clear. The words make more sense. Sometimes if it's a little mumbled or if it's outdoor and then it used proper microphone or audio recording technique, you know, just like in English, the machine is translation is not going to pick that up and it's going to put some really weird words in there. So you want to go in, and with Spanish, it's a lot harder than English. So yeah, you'll have to go in there and upload it yourself and change it, edit it. So this closed captioning here is actually, you can turn it on and off. And I did another presentation for eExtension on accessibility practices. And there is something that's called open captioning, and that's where the text is actually burned into like this, right? This was produced probably in, what do you call it? After Effects, you know, so the text is burned in, you're seeing the translation or the actual Spanish text in the video itself versus the closed captioning, which you can turn on and off. You can't turn on and off this right here. In this case, it is important to have that script in the description, right, that people can read, because this is not readable by a computer. However, having this, what we call open captioning, allows us to place that text in any place we want to on the video versus this is always going to show on YouTube at the very bottom. And if you have other items down here in the video, like text, it will put it on top of that. And it's really hard to read. But if we actually burn it into the video, we could put it anywhere we want to, away from this section down here, maybe, right? So it's not obfuscating any important information. So things to consider. All right, we still seeing my presentation here. Next slide. So tools. Google Translate. I'm just going to be showing you Google Translate, YouTube Transport, which is a service that we use here at Oregon State, and Zoom. And let's go quickly because we're running out of time. So Google Translate, you can do that online. There is a Chrome extension, which you can actually turn on and translate for yourself, like web pages, you know, things that you're looking at. And then there's also website widget and plugins for like Drupal and WordPress. So if you have a website, you can talk to your web developer, see if they're able to add the Google Translate widget or plugin, which will on the fly translate your text on your website. We're kind of looking into doing this. I'm sure you've seen some sites that already have this. They'll have a little Google thing and it says the, you know, the English, and then you can select it and then choose any multiple versions of languages. So let's we talked a little bit about YouTube, closed captioning and open captioning. It's also nice to have a dedicated channel or playlist for that other language. So you can have a Spanish language channel or a Vietnamese language channel, or you can make playlists of all of your Spanish or other language videos, right? I keep on saying Spanish, it's my default, but any other language. And so it makes it so much easier for folks to find. And then there's transport. So let's go back to our website and let's go with Google Translate. So the way I usually get to Google Translate, you can type in Google Translate, or I usually just go English to Spanish, right? And then this is the first thing that comes up here. You can enter the text. Enter your English text in this box. And it automatically translated into Spanish, right? Well, because I was going English Spanish, but you can, you know, choose any other language that you want. You can also go in here and choose, you know, let's say, oh, Russian, and now it's translating that English into Russian. If you click on these arrows here, it will swap them, and now it will translate any, you know, Russian language into English. Let's go back to this English to Spanish again. I want to translate this into another language. Okay, in Spanish is quiero traducir esto a otro idioma. And then you can go from and it's just translated that Spanish into English. So it's, again, this has gotten very, very good lately in the last, I'd say about a year, year and a half, where it's doing almost 90%, sometimes even better than that. And I lean on this quite a bit, especially for those rush jobs. But again, I don't rely 100% on this because it can fail. You know, it's only as good as how many people enter stuff in there, and it's using machine learning, and it's, you know, millions of people doing translations. Eventually, it just keeps on getting better and better. But it's not 100%. I don't know if it'll ever be 100%. For shorter things, it might be. More simpler things, it could be. But always double check your work. You can also listen to this.
Quiero traducir esto a otro idioma. Es importante.
So you can listen to what it sounds like in that specific language, right? And you can actually use your microphone to talk and dictate instead of text. Text is more accurate though. Okay, so that's that. There's also Google Translate Chrome extension. So if you use Chrome, and there's probably stuff for Firefox and Safari too. I use Chrome mostly, and you can download it and add it as an extension. I have it right here. It's this little icon. So if I go to OSU, I go to our homepage, I can then click on the Google Translate, and I could go translate this page. And right here it goes translated to English. I click on here and I select Spanish, and boom, it is automatically translated everything on that page into English. As long as it's text and not PDFs, it won't translate PDFs. This is why it's so important to have text and scripts and descriptions of photos and things like that, because then we can use these types of tools. And if you read this, it's pretty dang close. I mean, I would show it as probably acceptable in most cases. Right? And so there's ways of adding this little instead of an extension, you can have a plugin that will put this Google Translate thing option in your within your website itself. We haven't done that yet. We're looking into that, but you can talk to your web folks to see if they're able to do that for you. So that's an option. Okay, next thing. Okay, we talked about YouTube, so let's go to transport. So transport is a service, and this is through transperfect.com. We have it on our intranet where we can go in, you can upload a file, choose your language, and an expected date, project name, special instructions, whatnot. And this actually gets uploaded into the system to this TransPerfect service. It's a paid service. And they actually have, they don't do the machine translation. It's an actual human being that goes and does a translation. But before they do the translation, they'll give you an estimate, right? It's like so many cents per word or whatnot. They'll give you an estimate for the total. And then since we have this set up with that company already, we can select our budget authority so that any person can request it, but only the budget authority can allow it to go through and then get charged to do the translation, right? And then we get the translation back. We still double check that translation because even it's professional services, right? We just don't want to 100% trust something for someone else, because you never know who's doing the translation, right? But it is a real person that's doing the translation. It's not a machine thing. They might use software to start off just like I do, but they review it. And then we have someone on our end review it also. And it's just, 3 times reviewed, it's probably pretty good.
So Victor, do they do documents and captioning and everything? Like,
no, this is just like documents. So like, yeah, they don't do video captioning that I'm aware of. So Zoom, last few minutes here. There is a couple of Zoom tools. If you have the latest version of Zoom, there's a multi-language option, which you can choose for simultaneous interpreting. Remember, we talked about happening at the same time. Or you can do closed caption, which is actually text that shows up on screen. And the place that you go in to turn these on, if you sign into Zoom, on the web dashboard, you go into your settings and you scroll down to the advanced section. And here's the closed captioning you can turn on. You can also turn on save captions, allows participants to, excuse me, save the captions or the transcripts. So you want to make sure at least the first one is on. The second one, that's up to you if you want to allow them to save that. And then this other one is for the interpretation. Now, Zoom has as a default 9 languages, but if you click on the plus, you can add another language if you want to. Let's say you had, let's say, going. Man, if you have Man language, you know, we had some Man speakers. So yeah, I mean, you can add your any language that you want to. It's not limited. And you can have multiple interpreters in Zoom. You just have to assign it to them. So once you get it, let's say you're setting up your meeting in Zoom, you can actually assign interpretation privileges to a certain person. So you can put their email address here and you tell them which language they're going to. This is where you're doing it before the session. You can also do the live session. You can do it, the change and assign someone to be an interpreter once you're already in Zoom. This is just kind of a way of doing it ahead of time. What this allows is that this person that you assign will receive an email saying that the host has made you an interpreter for this meeting. You know, so they got that email and preparation, but you don't have to do it ahead of time. It's just an option. So once those are both turned on for the host, they'll show up like this. There's the CC, which is closed caption, and then there's the interpretation. And if you click on the closed caption one, it lets you assign a participant to type. So you can choose one of your participants as the person that is going to be typing in that different language. Or you can even do it in English too. If you have people that are, you know, can't hear the audio, you could have assign someone to do closed captioning in English, and whatever they type, it's going to show up in your Zoom. It will only show up like about a sentence or a fragment of a sentence at a time. But if people click on the closed caption, it brings up a running list of all of the caption text, right? It's kind of like all of the script. It also allows you to do third-party CC service if you have a paid service to do that. Or you can choose, I will type, and you will do the typing yourself. For the interpreting option, if we haven't specified it before when we scheduled it, we can actually select from a list of participants here and assign them as an interpreter for any, you know, either from English to Spanish or Spanish to English, or you know, you can choose, you can add interpreters for as many languages as you want. Now, keep in mind when you're doing this, there are actually going to be, people will select that language and they're only going to be hearing that person, well, not exclusively, because you can still hear the English, except the volume is going to be lower. But you're going to hear the interpreter really loud, you know, in your language. I wish we could show it on here. They didn't set up this meeting originally with that, so I can't show it to you, but you can practice this, and it's pretty nifty. It does take a little bit of training though, because you have to tell people, well, you have to click on the interpreting and choose your language and do that. It's not as intuitive, so you might have to do some training at the beginning of your meeting in order to do that. But once you got it and you got competent interpreters, it's great. It's kind of like being at the UN, right? You're hearing it in your own language at the same time that the English speaker does not have to pause in between because they're doing it simultaneously. Obviously, you still want them to speak slow enough so that the person that's doing simultaneous can keep up, because you know, it's tough to do stuff on the fly.
So Victor, so you can either have them speak or you can have them type.
That is correct. Yeah, and for the typing, I think I can actually show that on here. We have closed captioning. I am going to select I think, or is that only the host? Heather, are you still here?
You're a co-host, so you
I'm a
should be
co-host,
able-
but it doesn't let me do assign. I can do the closed captioning, but I can't assign someone else to do the closed captioning. Only a host can do that. However, Heather at the beginning assigned me as the closed caption person, so I should be able to, I think, yes, let's try this. Y'all see text there?
I think you have to turn it on. People have to turn it on.
Right, I'm sorry. Yes, you got to click on the closed captioning there. And if you click on it, you can actually, there's a show subtitle, view full transcript, and then there's some settings on there.
So can you try again? Because I didn't get
Yes.
anything to pop up.
Okay, so once you've chosen that to see the show subtitle, then you get any text there?
Yes, now I am.
Okay, great. Everybody else get that? So you could almost do this simultaneously if the person was a fast typer. Yeah, that's what it's like. Again, it's one or the other. We've actually, we're thinking of doing this at some meetings that we were having at one county, some health and some fire assistance meetings that we had in Lincoln County. And I first proposed doing the simultaneous one, but the interpreters were not as confident in being able to keep up, and so they didn't want to do the simultaneous. And we said, well, we could do captioning, and one gal was fast enough to do the English to Spanish, but the Spanish to English, we didn't have that. And so they ended up doing the consecutive interpreting. And that was interesting because it was going to be 3 languages. So we had English to Spanish, and we had all this written down to make sure people understood. So it was going to go from English first, then to Spanish, and then we had Mum, which is a native language. And so there was an interpreter from English to Spanish, and then was another interpreter from Spanish to Mum. And then there was another interpreter from Spanish to English, if there was questions the other way. And the same person that did the Spanish to Mum was doing the Mum to English. That made sense. Fortunately or unfortunately, we didn't have any Mum speakers that day that I was there. And so it was just English and Spanish, but it was pretty interesting. But since we were all on the same page, English to Spanish, one interpreter, the other interpreter, Spanish to English. And so there was no confusion as to who was doing what translation.
So Victor, we're kind of out of time. Did you
Yeah,
have,
this is it.
This is it. So does anybody have any questions? I see there were a few comments. A couple people had to slip out for other meetings, but Linda said that she uses Bing Translate a lot. She has gotten better results for some other languages other than Spanish from Bing. And Anne Marie says she has tried, I assume she's tried the transport.
Yes, she's at Oregon State.
Yep. And so she said that, she got a brochure done for less than $600 and it was very good. So that's good to know that there are options like that out there. I know we're always scrambling to find the right person to translate and get it done.
I do some translations for our communications department, but I got my other job too, and so I'll do some really quick, short stuff, like a flyer or something like that we need to get out really quick, turnaround on. But for bigger things, yeah, we usually send that out.
Well, and I know I feel guilty because people will say, well, can't we just have so-and-so, they speak Spanish. I'm like, I hate to ask people because that's not their job. And I feel
and even
guilty.
if they speak Spanish, that doesn't mean that they're good interpreters or translators, right? I mean, I worked as a professional interpreter and translator, and there's certain things that you follow and certain procedures and best practices. And if you're not trained in that, you're not necessarily going to be a good translator, right? So
right. Yeah. So that's why I'm kind of like nervous. I'd rather have them review it after it's translated,
right?
And to make sure that it makes sense and that we didn't screw something up in the translation, because I'm very paranoid about saying stupid things in our stuff, saying it wrong. Are there any other questions out there before we wrap it up? I don't see any in the
Thanks
chat.
for joining us.
Yeah, and I did put the link. I'll leave this open for a little bit. If you want to copy the survey link, I put that in there in the chat box. It's a Qualtrics survey. There's a few questions, and I'd love to hear if you have any suggestions for additional professional development topics. And I'll share that with the folks at ACE.
I'm not seeing that link, Lori. Could you send it to this
It's
one
in
person?
the chat.
I'm looking. Oh, you put it at the top. Got it.
No, that one's Heather's. Mine's
says from
farther
Lori.
down. Oh, it is. Okay. Well, I'll put it one more time just to make sure y'all got it. And
Welcome, Ann.
any information that you can help us fine tune some of these professional development sessions, that would be great. We want to make sure that we're meeting the needs of our members and others as well. So please share your feedback.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be just a presentation either. I mean, it could be a discussion if you want to talk and say, hey, let's talk about accessibility and just how is everyone doing it at their university, right? So don't think you have to be like the one to present or anything. It's just like, okay, I'd like to hear more about how others are doing this specific technology thing or online learning, pedagogy or whatever fits under our learning community heading. Be great. So.
Right. Well, thank you, Victor. I appreciate you doing this. I've learned quite a few things that I didn't know before. So awesome. That's great. I hope others did as well. We'll be signing off now. And again, I have my phone number and email in the chat. So if you have any questions or want to volunteer to help me with the learning community, reach out to me and we'll talk.
Bye, Nadine. Bye, Ann. Bye, Lori.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, Heather.